Hi everyone. Sorry for the late start. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is S or Saren. I'm a PhD student here at the CUNY Graduate Center. And I'm incredibly honored, excited to welcome you to Carceral Geographies and Queer Class Formations. So we have three wonderful scholars today here for our panel. What's going to happen is after I introduce them, they're each going to present for 15 to 20 minutes. And after that, we should have, if all goes well, another 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A and discussion. Okay, so first off, we'll have Māhū Kateb Goldman, who is a transdisciplinary scholar of queer urban studies, broadly concerned with the cultural production of race, sexuality, and urban space in the industrialized United States. His research centers queer of color critique and minoritarian feminist theory, together with critical urban humanities and American studies. Māhū earned his PhD in American Studies from Brown University in December 2025. He currently holds a visiting lecturer appointment in urban studies also at Brown. And Māhū is a lifelong and forever love-struck denizen of New York City.
I forgot I wrote that part, but it is so true. Sweat in my back from, getting here from Brooklyn.
And next up, we'll have Noelani Akiona. And I'm so sorry for the surely mispronunciations following. But born and raised in Kapapa, Oahu, Noelani Akiona, she, they, is a Kanaka Oi Pacific Island Studies master's student at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. They are researching the gendered impacts of mass incarceration in Hawaii and Oceania within anti-colonial, anti-capitalist, and anti-carceral frameworks. And then we'll finish off with Taha Kaleem. And Kaleem is a PhD candidate in the Department of Anthropology at Brandeis University, where his research examines the social life of oil in Doha and its entanglements with gender, race, sexuality, ethnicity, and citizenship. His work investigates how Qatar's petro-economy not only shapes material infrastructures and economic hierarchies, but also produces, regulates, and reconfigures gendered subjectivities. Kaleem graduated cum laude from Georgetown University in Qatar. He has conducted fieldwork in Qatar, Egypt, and Indian-administered Kashmir. His work has been supported by the Wana Grand Foundation, the Center for Lesbian and Gay Studies, also known as FLAGS, and Black, Brown, and Queer Fellowship, and Crown Center for Middle Eastern Studies. Okay, so without further ado, I will welcome up Māhū for his presentation, Cavity Such.
Thank you so much. Oh, it's literally right there. And I drag, and then it should just be there. Yeah, please. You have to press continue.
Continue. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. There it is. There we go. Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Has not have known how to do one fraction if what you just saw. Okay. But we're good, right, with everything?
Yes.
Oh, of course, if I want to change slide, do I like to move this like
Mm-hmm.
to go between them? Is it cross functional?
And I guess not.
Sorry.
Yes. I think we may have to.
It looks like you might just scroll down. Where there's arrows, so maybe if you just.
There we go. Yes. Okay, great. Mm-hmm. There we go. So you're just gonna scroll.
Okay. Okay, we'll make it work. Thank you so much, Andy. I really appreciate it. Okay, let's do it. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much to my co-presenters, to our facilitator, and to everybody who has made this conference possible. It's my first time here, and even having been here for 20 minutes, I already think it's gonna maybe be one of my favorites. So I'm really excited for the next couple of days. So without any further ado. Yeah, I'm used to like I'll click so I can get it might be a little bit awkward this because I don't see it on here, so I'm see it there and just bear with me as I manage that. Okay. Oh, okay. You have to be very gentle. Oh. All right. Well, let's just we'll make it work. In the 1984 work on canvas called Untitled Cavity Search, painter Martin Wong depicts a naked figure with dark brown skin bent before the waist, hands, and nightstick of a uniformed prison guard. The figure's hanging penis and exposed rear are prominent in Wong's composition as the officer grasps the figure's torso with one hand and, using the other hand, inserts a finger well into the figure's rectal cavity. A disposition towards scenes of urban policing emerges across a range of Wong's visual works, as well as across ephemera contained in his archives. With particular intensity, this gay Chinese-American artist, known for his eccentric queer affects and affinities around New York City's Lower East Side, arranges brown and black masculine subjects in ambivalent, intimate touch with police, fire, and corrections systems. Wong is originally from Northern California, where he was born right after World War II, painted during the 1970s, and returned in the mid-1990s while dying of complications from HIV/AIDS. Yet it is in New York during the long 1980s, from 1978 until 1994, that Martin Wong assembled the living, enduring core of his artistic career, mostly from a sixth-floor walk-up apartment on the Lower East Side. As a visual artist, he exhibited in upstart downtown galleries, and by 1984, his work had been taken up in the collections of the Metropolitan, Museum of Art, MoMA, among others. Alongside his own practice, Wong established himself. Oh, it's so dysfunctional. We'll just leave it there for a second. Alongside his own practice, Wong also established himself as the most connected and, by all accounts, the most zealous impresario and broker of New York City's graffiti writing scene at precisely the conjuncture of its violent displacement from subways and streets. Wong's offbeat entanglements and increasingly his mainstream capital were vital to graffiti's replacement during that decade. A recent critical essay by art historian David J. Getzey stands out for its keen focus on Wong's prison fix, a phrase I invoke here with explicit gesture to Ruth Wilson Gilmore's seminal theorization, while also suggesting the fix as hunger or desire line. Getzey, though, structures his essay around another phrase, one which Wong explicitly uses to delineate his priorities as a painter in a 1996 interview with art scholar Yasmin Ramirez, and one with which I will linger across my own paper today, the phrase bricks and jails. As an object of Wong's interest, the first term, bricks, is well covered. Particular attention has gathered on Wong's meticulous, marvelous practice of visualizing the physical and sensual architectures of 1980s Lower Manhattan and Brooklyn brick by brick, and this is a particularly well-regarded example of Wong's work as such. The second object in the dyad, jails, has been noted throughout Wong's illustrious career, including by Ramirez and art critic Julie Alt, but less thoroughly. David Getzey speaks to the complex poetics of desire with which Wong balances advocacy and prurience in dreamlike scenes of sexually charged prison encounters, and thus, still quoting Getzey, the interdependence of his identification with and objectification of his prison subjects that fills these canvases. Still, I think there is much more to probe here. What substance of relation exactly gives energy to Wong's prurience as well as his advocacy? What structures of feeling color his identification come objectification? Offering a deeper critical appraisal and appreciation of Wong's racial queerness than even many intersectional analyses have tended to see, aesthetic scholar Roy Perez underscores that one answer to that question is race and the production of racial difference. With critical incision as well as care toward the ways Wong's queer aesthetics have already been framed and toward Wong's wild portfolio of work itself, my paper today insists upon the racial logic that sutures these dyadic objects of Wong's desirous design, in figuration and in fact, brick and jail. My argument is three-pronged. First, I suggest that we think brick and jail less as discrete interests and more as intimately integrated, braided objects of desire for Martin Wong's queer aesthetics, a particular and particularly metropolitan conjoint which his art articulates and mediates together. Then I contend that these forms, brick and jail, might connote two broader formations in the late 20th century United States: capital city and carceral state, respectively. Those forms that compose the late capitalist urban fabric and those that compose the late liberal police state, such that Wong's figuration of brick together with jail might register his broader engagement with the structures and environments of carceral capitalism. Finally, while Wong's bricks and jails help animate a well-recognized geography of same-sex longing pervading his work, I contend that racial difference and desire, more specifically erotic desires for racialized difference, form the substance which sutures jail with brick, state with city, carceral with capital in Wong's figuration. This argument grows from, toward, and with, and perhaps also a bit askew, a set of claims that I make in my dissertation, now book manuscript in progress, which, in brief, proceeds as follows. Grounded in an analysis of Black avant-garde writer Amiri Baraka's 1964 play Dutchman, alongside white gay poet John Giorno's 1994 essay about cruising a subway toilet for sex, I've unfolded a concept of the queer not as a narrowly sexual identity position, but as a racial sexual condition of what I call bad or unruly transit in the late liberal metropole. Graffiti's spatial and affective strategies, I argue, crystallize such bad transit in the deindustrializing city, and thus graffiti assembles a queer aesthetics of and a queer aesthetics as US urban crisis. If graffiti's bad transit is consolidated in the New York subway, It there habilitates two dominant correction regimes designed to sanitize that particular space and clarify transit more broadly. These are the prison and the gallery, in my argument, or the carceral state and the capital market. Martin Wong's life and work, not least as an eminent collector and middleman in the downtown graffiti scene of the 1980s, I argue sutures these two worlds, prison and gallery, carceral state and capital market, with remarkable complexity. Complexity which we cannot narrowly encapsulate as pure militaristic, nationalistic, or capitalistic violence, but also cannot reduce to some kind of pious or purely queer critique of such violence either. In my dissertation and book project, this comes to a head through his collaborations with a particular graffiti writer, Angel Ortiz, LA2, which of course in Q&A I'm happy to talk about, but it won't be our focus here. So I've been thinking Wong closely and critically in terms of carceral capital, and through Wong working to nuance those terms, carceral and capital, toward a queer of color framework for carceral capitalism that foregrounds minoritarian desires vis-a-vis state and market. The sheer complexity that makes Martin Wong such a touchstone figure for that work and makes his aesthetics so particularly vital for a minoritarian, anti-identitarian queer analysis can be condensed in the painting with which I've begun. I turn back to that painting now, untitled Cavity Search. I hazard three broad ways of reading this piece, and I want to emphasize that I am compelled by their interrelation more than by an attempt to adjudicate between them. More precisely, I argue that the erotics of racial difference and cross-racial desire connect, coordinate, and consummate all three of these possible postures that I think Wong takes up as he imposes whitened prison guard with blackened prisoner. Ultimately, the painting evinces that sticky bind of racial carceral capitalism, suturing brick and jail. First, we might read Untitled as a critical injunction, a sharp visual assignation against policing and police states in which the exposed and violated brown body, in turn, in its actual choreographed turn toward officer and viewer, exposes the racialized, sexualized violence of state power in the late liberal US city. In this affective arrangement, the searched figure becomes sympathetic victim or even martyr, an interpolation that, of course, is no less political and no less a relation of power simply because it bears a critical posture. Indeed, and in particular, this construction of the stark naked brown detainee as a canvas of brutality and thus a visual instrument for sympathy or solidarity just as well renders him an object of Wong's racialized desire, even lust, a raw and ready attachment site for feelings and fabulations of cross-racial intimacy, intuition, or avowal or disavowal. A parallel positioning of Blackness organizes the one work which the one work by Keith Haring that explicitly names racial justice its subject, painted in the watershed wake of the young Black artist Michael Stewart's 1983 murder in the hands of New York Transit Police. In Haring's USA for Africa, pictured here, as aesthetic scholar Ricardo Montes underlines, a composition which critically and meticulously interprets racial violence through a dizzying melange of figures and forms still organizes its imagery not only around a phantasmagoric figuration of blanched naked, raw, receptive Black masculinity, but even more pointedly around the blackened penis, its formal punctum, curiously possibly erect amid these myriad lynchings. I draw up Haring's drawing, if it will draw up again where it should. I draw up Haring's drawing as I move to situate the phallus in Wong's, with its thick, fleshly, and compositional weight in explicit dialogue with the narrow, whitened figure that emerges from the correction officer's pelvis. Here, too, a phallic formation is the formal punctum, but alongside the detainee's penis, the officer's hand seems to connote something as feeble or deflated as it is firm and forceful. Again, then, the commitment to racial justice, which we may recognize in the painting, relies at least in part on a particular racial jouissance for Wong, bound up in the construction of blackened flesh as pure, available, abstracted sign. This vantage brings me to a second closely linked reading of Untitled Cavity Search, not just critical injunction, but consuming penetration. In this sense, Wong's gaze doubles the penetration of the guard's hand, and the viewer's gaze doubles it yet again. The viewer joins Wong in joining the officer in fucking the prisoner, with each repose inflecting, rather than merely copying, that racialized and sexualized force of entry. Multiplying the pucker where the whitened policing figure presses the browned policed ass, Wong does not just locate erotic charge in racial violation, he accumulates and circulates erotic pleasure from the apparent wrongness of this violent touch. The police will fuck you, Wong's visual strategies announce here, directed perhaps especially at the Latino men with whom he most often lived, worked, and had sex during the 1980s, so therefore fuck the police. Yet in so fucking the police, this erotic multiplication as well enables Wong and invites his viewer to become the police, to like it, not to loathe it, to potentially fantasize about fucking this open and fleshed hole too. Moreover, maybe the prisoner likes it all too, Wong could be suggesting. Maybe his dick is actually hard, and maybe it is him who Wong wishes to become. And so the multifocal distribution of erotic energy in this scene capacitates Wong to continually shift not only and not most importantly his sexual, but his racial positionality, while accruing erotic value through these seams of racial feeling and racial difference. In tandem, the cloudy, thick, off-white strokes of Wong's brickwork in the near background do more than just look on. This cool, concretized institutional curtain reveals more than it obscures or backfills. It strokes in too. It is precisely through the wide whiteness of Wong's wall that the sharply contrasting brown skin of his indeed arched, figure emerges, and through brown flesh, especially around the figure's penis, that the enclosing architecture of the white wall becomes clearest, mutually composing one another. Together animating the two ways I have highlighted to potentially read this painting, as a critical interrogation and as a consumptive penetration, we can read Untitled Cavity Search, perhaps as what Jose Esteban Munoz calls critical queer transport. It casts a picture of ever already unrealized queer pasts and always already still to come queer futures, or ever already foreclosed queer regions and always already overt queer vestibules from within the vexed present. Not by straightening these out, but by holding them messily, uneasily, and irreconcilably together. What I hope to impress here is this: if brick and jail connote city and state, and if their bond in Martin Wong's work thus bespeaks his desirous, dynamic visual entanglements with carceral capital, those entanglements then rely upon the erotics of race. And these complexities and contradictions, which of course are also contributions, do not somehow cancel Wong's queerness, they constitute it. Scholars across queer and aesthetic studies have shown how Wong suggests a queerness well beyond and well less simple than sexual identity. Recent work by Shante Paradigm Smalls has especially beautifully written Wong's minoritarian queerness into a specifically Black queer interpretation of hip-hop culture in New York City. Yet even these readings reach a kind of impasse around the queer carceral obsessions that permeate Wong's work. Rather than simply assuming or simply denying that queer aesthetics in the late liberal city should oppose carceral capitalism, my paper today has tried to linger with a very small portion of the ambiguity and the intimacy that defines Martin Wong's minoritarian performances around the brick jail. I suggest not simply that queer expression might desire and participate in carceral capital geographies, but also that such intimate ambiguity might map the metropolitan queer itself better, if also in ways more challenging than neat identitarian formulations. In my ongoing research and writing with these themes and images, I hope to expand rather than delimit queer of color analyses of Wong to account for the queerness of his inscrutable interimbrications with specifically carceral and specifically racialized carceral capitalism in the late liberal US city. That's all formally. For later discussion, we might think a bit more about Wong's relationship to graffiti his performances with and against the capital art market as they express these queer carceral desires, and the genealogy of the title for this painting, Cavity Search, which is not Wong's own term, but actually a term indexed or term ascribed to this through its indexing to be included within broader circulating museum and catalog compendia. Thank you so much for your time and your interest. I'll leave this part to you.
Great. Next up, we have Noelani Akiona. And you did such an incredible job at timekeeping yourself that you don't even need me. So, congratulations.
Thank you. It's honestly rare for me. So.
Thank you. Did you just like tap it or?
You scroll with the like touchpad.
Oh,
But it's so
So yeah, be so very delicate.
oh, okay.
like you'll
Okay.
we should pay some.
Thank you. Aloha nui kako and warm greetings to all of us. My name is Noelani Akiona, and I'm going to talk about my work / research-ish, which I have given very mouthy title called Hoʻohaliʻa, Māhū, and Queered Anticarceral Alterities in Hawaiʻi. So mahalo nui to my fellow panelists and facilitator, CUNY, and everyone here for joining me. It's such an honor to be here in New York with some really beautiful people and to have come with some of my dearest friends and comrades who have traveled from Hawaii to with me. A couple of them are presenting tomorrow, so mahalo nui, everybody. And without further ado, I'm just gonna hopefully get right into it. And so, okay. And there's my face. So first, a little bit about me. Again, my name is Noelani. I'm a Kanaka Oiwi, or Native Hawaiian, second-year graduate student at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, pursuing my master's degree in the Pacific Island Studies Department. I'm born and raised on the edge of Kipapa Gulch, kind of in the middle of the island of Oahu, in the occupied Hawaiian Kingdom. For the past 4 or 5 years, I've worked in spaces aiming to address the inequities related to incarceration and policing for most of my professional and academic career. And I've been involved in some youth advocacy, community organizing stuff, particularly within decarceral and abolitionist frameworks. Some of the time, learned from a very long and loving list of comrades and mentors. I'm currently assisting with a project called the No Labels Creative Writing Project that leads a creative writing class and produces a quarterly-ish newsletter titled Liberty, with students incarcerated in the Women's Correctional Facility located in Kailua, also on Oahu. My intention in this work and for today is to hopefully shed light on the carceral state and queer experiences in my home. Okay, and that's just a really quick overview of what I'm going to go over with you folks today. Okay, so I'm aiming to frame this discussion around this concept called hali'a. And Olelo Hawaii, or the Hawaiian language, the word hali'a can mean a sudden remembrance or premonition, a memory specifically of a person or person or persons, particularly in a very fond and loving way. And this is also a form of another word called hali, which is just H-A-L-I, which means to carry, fetch, bear, and more. So the word hoʻohaliʻa adds ho'o to the front to breathe life into the word to make it an action or a verb. And hoʻohaliʻa can mean to breathe life into this remembrance and this instinct to hold our memories and our people close, who are deeply rooted in our aina, which also means the land which feeds, and with one another. So to frame the following with a little bit of like drama, like e hoʻohaliʻa kako, which kind of means let us all hoʻohaliʻa and reawaken our premonitions and our ancestral memories. Okay. So, similar to many Native peoples and Indigenous folks, mass incarceration has traumatized Native Hawaiians for generations. Historically, Native Hawaiians relied heavily on punishment to maintain social order and hierarchy for just too many aspects of social life to recall all of them. And they could be as severe as death or like cursing your family line if you don't remediate whatever harm it is that you did. However, there were also many alternatives to punishment and ways to make up for harm collectively with one another in our homelands in Hawaiʻi and with our hundreds and thousands of ancestral gods, deities, relatives, ancestors, and so on. One very popularized example of this alternative is called puʻuhonua, which could be translated to places of refuge, where people who violated these strict societal rules back in the day could go and escape punishment regardless of their social status nor crime committed. I won't go too much into detail, but systems and institutions like puʻuhonua being regular is just one of the ways that we have always held space for one another, which of course drastically shifted with the arrival of the prison industrial complex, among other things. I use this example of puʻuhonua here because they were designated spaces that were accessible in every land division and had an accompanying steward who welcomed and sheltered people for several days. So anyone and everyone who entered this kind of place of refuge, such as puʻuhonua, were free from punishment, and they were promised safety. I think that we had these kinds of alternatives like puʻuhonua to punishment because, in line with our social norms, Native Hawaiians have always understood the inherent dignity and humanity of one another and our respective lands and genealogies. This shared understanding is so central to our ways of being with one another, yet our reality as the native stewards and descendants of our ancestral lands shifted entirely with the enculturation of the carceral state. Perhaps one of the most famous examples of this drastic reality shift was with the incarceration of our last reigning monarch, Queen Liliuokalani, who was imprisoned following the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom back in January 1893 by a group of white American businessmen and U.S. Marines. Queen Liliuokalani's incarceration is significant because of her familial legacy with her grandfather, Chief Kamanava, who was hanged by the provisional government as the very first example of capital punishment in Hawaiʻi. So these two familial cases in the 19th century marked the beginning of what has become a norm in our islands: mass incarceration against Native Hawaiians and other oppressed peoples in Hawaiʻi. And there's a long in-between history between the overthrow and now, today, but I'm going to spare us for some time and just try to get to the point. Native Hawaiians today make up the majority of both jail and prison populations and are drastically overrepresented. Thousands of incarcerated Hawaiians are shipped off to the American continent because we're not in America, thousands of miles away from our communities and our homelands in private prisons. Native Hawaiians make up about 20% of the general population in Hawaiʻi, a minority of the general population, but almost half of the incarcerated population, and are overrepresented at every stage of the criminal legal system, like arrests, criminal, pretrial detainees, probation, and so on. Countless Native Hawaiians, including myself, can name at least one family member or loved one or friend who has been arrested and or incarcerated at some point in their lives. So to kind of give a picture of it, if everyone in this room was Native Hawaiian and I asked people to raise their hand if they know someone who has been incarcerated, pretty much almost everybody, if not everybody, would probably have their hand up. And we know why this happens. The state-imposed premature death, coined by Ruth Wilson Gilmore, intentionally funnels us into cages and punitive institutions that go far beyond what our ancestors understood as the boundaries of punishment and consequence. I also want to make a quick note that similar trends are found across the Pacific, where similar cases and uses of carcerality apply, and for Pacific Islanders in the United States. But for the sake of time, I won't expand. Some places like Tuvalu or Wallis Futuna don't have prisons, so I'm not going to make that kind of generalization. Native Hawaiian women experience incarceration at much higher rates than Native Hawaiian men. Hawaiian men make up approximately over 38% or 36% of the incarcerated male population, while Hawaiian women make up 43.7% of the incarcerated female population. They also have an incarceration rate double that of all other incarcerated women, except for the 15 to 19-year-old age range that's not included in the chart. All of these numbers are likely majorly undercounted because of rigid colonial framings of race and gender, like blood quantum, the science sex birth, inconsistent data collections, and so on. Hawaii is kind of like, if you can imagine a prison where you're a prison system where you folks are maybe from Hawaii's probably like 10 or 15 years behind that. So not all women are being counted and acknowledged as suggested. In Hawaii, we have so many queer native ways of being and loving that I couldn't competently or completely list out. But one way to understand our historical and cultural embraces of intimacy is the term Māhū, which is largely meant transgender, or as Hawaii's third gender. But in more recent times, Māhū is used to include non-binary, gender non-conforming, and a more expansive identity of queer sexuality and gender. Our ancestors historically understood Māhū as beloved relatives and community members who embody masculine and feminine energies and were typically known as caretakers, healers, and educators. Our ancestors didn't also think about gender in the very rigid way that many of us in Hawaii do today. Not us and me, but they really just cared about the ways that we relate to one another and what that means in a relationship to each other and how we care for our communities, our lands, and our family units. Like other Pacific Island nations, Christian missionization and criminalization of queer identities by the occupying government is a large reason why Native Hawaiians today are unaware of and or persistently deny and oppose the existence of Māhū. The term Māhū has also been used as a transphobic and homophobic slur, but has been reclaimed by Māhū in the community as one that recognizes the potentiality of queer belonging. Māhū also doesn't necessarily translate to queer, because being of and from Hawaii offers us so much more than that. This is because of our kinship to our land, or Aina, which we know as our ancestors and extensions of ourselves. So we have been queered because of the ways that we exist as extensions and lovers of the land, all of which defy this colonial gender binary and cis heternormativities. So here again, I utilize the term Māhū as an expansive term that defies this boundedness and is an example of the infinite ways in which we strengthen our self-nation. I'm also not going to I'm intentionally not talking about all of the disparate harm and that Māhū experienced while incarcerated and outside of incarceration, like the other numbers in the previous slide. The other numbers are more so for context, but I want to focus on Māhū as potential, as perhaps meaning alterity, and perhaps as it is an alterity that has already arrived in us. Sorry, I'm a little like tired and jet lagged. But perhaps Māhū is an alterity that has arrived in us ancestrally. And maybe Māhū is where our anti-carceral alterities eagerly await to welcome all of us in Hawaii. Yeah. Māhū is more than any English translations to some type of queer identity. Our kinship to Aina, again, our land, and one another contains millions of generations of infinitely inscribing networks of care. Leanne Simpson wrote in her book, As We Have Always Done, queer indigeneity cannot be reduced to just sexual orientation. It's a web of supportive, reciprocal, generative relationships that we often don't have the names for in English, and that exist outside of the hierarchy and the imagination of heteropatriarchy. A hierarchy that places the relationship of cisgendered married monogamous men and women at the top, and de-emphasizes or erases all other relationships. Despite an increase in data collection and reporting, to my knowledge, there is no disaggregated qualitative data, or quantitative data, on how many trans or queer people are incarcerated under the state of Hawaii's jurisdiction. But we can take a pretty good informed guess and say that the following similar queer incarceration and like criminology trends, at least across westernized and American places, that trans and queer folks in Hawaii are disproportionately incarcerated at varying rates, and that the same is also true in at least Australia and Aotearoa, or New Zealand. There are countless incarcerated Māhū, trans, non-binary, and queer folks who are entirely discounted and erased because of binaries that did not exist prior to Americanization. My point here is not that trans folks should simply be transferred to the facility that's most aligned with their gender, nor should we just be collecting and rounding up numbers of who's queer inside of every facility, but just to emphasize that gender is carceral, and we cannot keep incarcerating people for trying to survive under these colonial conditions that are designed to disappear our loved ones and Native Hawaiians. The prison will never be a gender-affirming institution. Real, felt, and meaningful collective liberation, inclusive of Māhū, I don't think will happen without abolition. I envision Māhū as a kind of intricate, porous, tightly wound cordages or like ropes of relationship that has enough holes and stuff to both catch and free, similar to visions offered by Hawaiian scholars Noelani and Hoʻohaliʻa. So if incarceration serves to dispose of people, Māhū can offer us an otherwise in refusing disposability and the occupying state's legitimacy. There's so much more than what any numbers tell us because the numbers are not the most important thing here at all. It is our lives. One person on the streets and or behind cages should have been enough for Hawaiʻi and us to seriously reconsider what community really means and ask us what our relational responsibility is in ensuring our loved ones' safeties and well-beings without harming them further. Millennial Po Young, a Māhū Native Hawaiian scholar, reminds us all that the struggle for abolition within the Hawaiian nation whose sovereignty is being suppressed is not a straightforward task. It's a long quote, so I'll let us skim it on the screen while I wrap up. But while imperfect, like so many others, our storytelling traditions might bring us closer to an expansive and meaningfully liberated, demilitarized, and deoccupied Hawaiʻi. Okay. Trying to make sure. I'm here to struggle towards abolition and liberation with you, and I'm waiting alongside you to exercise these familiar protocols and ceremonies in Hawaiʻi of welcoming our loved ones home. Miriam Kava says that abolition offers a million little experiments, and today I share one. There's a growing archive of dreams and love as liberation being created right now, with just some of these archives being published in the Liberty newsletter coming outside of the women's prison on Oahu. This is a place where the bounds of intimacy are resisted and redefined every day by those in one of the most oppressed places a person can be. And in the next few slides, I'll briefly share some writings and contributions from folks, a part of the creative writing project at the women's prison. I also share these snapshots from the newsletter with my classmates' consent, and I'm not going to explicitly frame them or their meanings because I think their work should speak for themselves. So the first two pieces on this slide are addressed to one another. Someone from the left, their name is Scotty now, and on the right, her name is Kayla. They were a couple, and this is kind of like, this is from, I think, a Valentine's edition of the 2024 newsletter. And I'm going to kind of briefly go through these, but if feel free to ask questions later, or I can send these to you. The second slide on the left, we have a quote from Kristen, again from 2024, on building community. It's freedom building. And on the right, we have a love letter from someone named Haley last year to her partner, where they commit, like, kind of building these freedom dreams together. If I do share that kind of like framing, it's because I've talked with them about it. And my main working research questions so far are asking, how are all of the carceralities surrounding queerness and belonging felt differently for those imprisoned in Hawaiʻi? And how does their love for one another, their lovers, and their homelands transform sites like carceral facilities and themselves? Here I pulled two quotes from an October, I think a Halloween edition of the Liberty newsletter, the left from someone named Haley and the right from someone named Tatiana. The two are a couple. And in these snapshots, I kind of see them as like these letters of love potentially defying disposability and envisioning these kinds of futures together. Last and certainly not least, I share a collective poem and some artwork from Jessica titled Onipa'a on the bottom, which in Olelo Hawaiʻi, the Hawaiian language, can be translated as steadfast and unmoving. So it's a contradictory word, like oni means kind of like to move, and pa'a also means to stay firmly in place. And onipa'a is a term that's used a lot with Queen Hoʻohaliʻa because she remained onipa'a in the face of American takeover and that act of war back in 1893. And next to that art is an untitled poem collected and inspired by a song famously sung by Israel Kamakawiwo Ole titled Hawaiʻi 78. I believe that these visions of freedom have truly transformed this intensely carceral space and how they both define and practice freedom every single day in creating freedom dreams and alterities in their art and other creative spaces. The occupying state and the prison, at least in Hawaiʻi, refuse belonging, refuse intimacy, refuse love, and refuse care. Queerness and the potential of being queered in incarceration disrupts all of these attempts and refuses boundedness instead. This kind of research is very difficult to do inside of the prison. With just a lot of restraints in general about working inside of a prison. It's a lot to go in general and to do the research, going through different departments. There's a lot of stuff to talk about on that, but I think that the struggle for liberation must happen with those that are inside and incarcerated, in collaboration with them, knowing that they are still a part of our community, regardless of them being severed by a bar or cages or prisons. And a free Hawaiʻi is free of all cages. Abolition and queer liberation is not separate from the struggle for sovereignty and deoccupation, and that's especially true in Hawaiʻi. And I'm going to close with a quote from Jose Esteban Munoz, who wrote that the future is queerness's domain. Queerness is a structuring and educated mode of desiring that allows us to see and feel beyond the quagmire of the present, the here and now as a prison house. Queerness is essentially about the rejection of a here and now, and an insistence on the potentiality or concrete possibility for another world. So when I Hali'a, I remember and carry freedom worlds forward like those at the women's prison. And I hear my auntie yelling at the kids to come eat because everybody gets fed. And my family members were never taken by the criminal legal system, militarism, a coin termed by Hananike Trask, and American occupation. So when we free Hawaiʻi, there will be no one left behind because we will live in the ways that we have always known to be free. Hoʻohaliʻa kākou, let us all carry this future forth in fond remembrance. And these are my sources, and mahalo nui for very graciously listening and sharing space with me. This Linktree link is will take you to a Linktree with some previous editions of the newsletter that we have uploaded so far. I think the newest one just came out right before I came. I would have loved to bring, but please check it out. And thank you so much.
All right, I'm gonna. And last but not least, we have Todd.
Okay, great. So our technological issues slowed us down a little bit, but we have almost 10 minutes for Q&A from our wonderful presenters, who I just want to take a second to thank for the incredible knowledge and insight that you shared with us all.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So my question's for Noelani. Did I say that right?
Noelani.
Noelani. Sorry.
Sure.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really informative for me. I learned a lot. And I want to understand what your research has uncovered about Māhū and queer Native Hawaiians who engaged in political resistance to white settler colonialism and were incarcerated as a result. Because that's the area that I'm researching more overall against the US empire. And I was curious what you've uncovered in Hawaii.
Yeah, mahalo for your question. Let's see. So first, it's like kind of research, but it's technically it hasn't happened through my school or through there's just been a lot of like recent changes in the women's facility specifically that have kind of prevented me from like starting officially the research, but I've been in there for maybe the past year or so, kind of worked around mostly re-entry stuff and decarceral advocacy for a while. So I think that in terms of political struggles against white settler colonialism, or I think I'm probably somewhat like more familiar with maybe I think there it's kind of sorry, I have like many different things going through the brain right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one way to think about it is that I think at least in Hawaii, like there's also just less people in general. So I think we also have to be around like 1.8 million or 2 million as our general population. total, but I think queer resistance to white, and there's also a lot of like East Asian settler colonialism, which is a whole other topic to go into. But one thing that I'm thinking about right now is something called the Wilcox Rebellion, which happened right after the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom. And I think it's not really a queer resistance to white settler colonialism or American takeover, but I think that it's not even necessarily in my research or my findings. This is the findings of a lot of other Native Hawaiian scholars and queer Native Hawaiian scholars. Like I'm thinking about someone named Dr. Jamaica Hoʻohaliʻa, who's probably more known for her struggles on Mauna Kea when they were trying to build a telescope on probably like one of our most sacred mountains. And I think that we are queered by our belonging, and similarly to like being queered by our indigeneity almost. And maybe Mauna Kea as a struggle is another way to think about like queer resistance to white settler colonialism. I don't want to take too much time up just because I'm rambling and talking through my thoughts as I'm thinking them. But I think on Mauna Kea particularly, there were these set places for Māhū folks and queer folks to be specifically. There were spaces that were, I think, two scholars named Noelani and Dr. Pahala Johnson. I don't know if they're doctor yet, but they talk about it and write about it a lot better than I'm mumbling through right now. But I think that's probably a better example of that kind of question. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, no, that was helpful. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
My question was for you as well. I know I have a legal background, so your point about how women are more frequently incarcerated than men, I thought was really interesting. I know for Black women, like typically when we're incarcerated at higher rates, there's a eugenics reason behind it. And so I'm curious if you know kind of how that translates to one, if that's prevalent for that statistic, but also if how that translates then to like queer or trans people who are also kind of like seeing that larger number of incarceration.
Well, that's very much. I'm also probably going to ramble through it a little bit as quickly as possible. I don't want to take up too much
We're all
time.
yappers.
I think that maybe I'm also not the expert or the best person to ask for in terms of like eugenics for Native Hawaiians specifically. I think it's more in the terms of the history of incarceration is more tied to the state legitimacy part of it and the occupying state legitimacy part of it, as these heteronormativities are being enforced in service of legitimizing the occupying state, the American state, to be clear. So like we don't think of ourselves, a lot of us don't think of ourselves as Americans because of someone named Dr. Haunani K. Trask, who has this like, really famous speech where she's yelling, "We are not American, we are not American," because so many of us have been indoctrinated to thinking that we are American. And there's a lot of Native Hawaiians in the service. A lot of Micronesians also serve in the military and also have kind of like a similar way of thinking about being Americanized in that way. So I think that it's more so in terms of displacing Native Hawaiians from their homes and their communities. Like over half of the Native Hawaiian population now lives on the American continent or outside of Hawaiʻi because of settler colonialism and this displacement. And a lot of us are also moved to these private prisons, largely in Arizona, and I think maybe Oregon, to private prisons. So more so for that kind of state legitimacy as what I'm familiar with. I could be very wrong, honestly, but yeah. Thank you.
Okay, great. We're out time, but let's take one final question at the back. No, go ahead. Yes.
So I was wondering, like for security concerns, also for yourself as a researcher and also the people that you've been doing interviews with, how are you thinking about it? Like when you're thinking also about publishing this research?
That's a really important question and something that I had to constantly think about even before I began the PhD. through institutional challenges of like IRB and Qatar's own policy. They didn't need IRB approval from a local institution in order to conduct any kind of human research. So I had to learn how to say things without saying them, at least on paper. So questions of citizenship, migration, for example, a project that I did that was funded by the Qatari state actually was looking at their new airport and see how that helped them replan their vision for 2030. All the Gulf states have a vision of 2030, what they want to accomplish, and they gave me a lot of money to do that. But then what in turn happened when I went to the airport, I got to learn how critical the infrastructure is to the functioning of the global economy, and also found really interesting ways through which people transit. But it brings me back, anytime you put queer and Qatar together, they're gonna come to me. I have spoken to my interlocutors, who also, who kept asking when I was doing this work, this I have been doing for all these years, and they're like, why? Like, why would you put queer and Qatar together? It sounds dangerous. Why would you risk it? And I don't know. I felt like there is so much nuance and so much ignorance and misunderstanding, both in scholarship and then in how the region is perceived, that if I can make just a tiny bit of contribution, or anyone can read that, oh, it's not trafficking, it's not slavery, queer people are not stoned in the market, queerness doesn't exist, because it is kind of quite these obvious frames that they push, there are no queer people, it doesn't exist, and yeah. So that's why I think I'm doing it. But I kind of am also preparing for focus after they see it together. But hey, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Now I'm just happy I'm doing it.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much to our brilliant panelists today, and thank you so much to everyone who came. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.